good to see a lot of faces on the call today. Thanks everybody who's got their camera on. So we've got a lot of interesting stuff to talk about today, and I'm really looking forward to hearing. We have a bunch of folks who are going to be contributing during today's call. But before I get into the agenda, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the theme for this week, and really what we are encouraging all of you to focus on and share with anybody that you manage or work with or care about is this notion of the SBP value of wearing your hard hat. For some of you who have either returned to work in the field or are going to return to work in the field next week or very soon, keeping safety top of mind is really important, both for yourself and making sure that you're mitigating your own risk. And I think someone said this to me the other day. They said, you know, it's really a sign of respect when I see other people doing and wearing masks and gloves in situations where that's required. And so I would say also just respecting those around us by adhering to the PPE requirements. For others of you, you are not returning to the field. We are not reopening our offices next week. Some people are working sites where maybe they're the only person in the office and they're able to go in and out of there. But for a lot of us, we're going to continue working from home. And I think with that, we've probably all come to appreciate some of the real pros of working from home and then some of the unique challenges. Whether it's telling your 7-year-old to turn the TV down right before the all team call, or, you know, trying to sort of juggle work and home and life and neighborhood responsibilities. So it can be hard. You know, I was reading an article this morning about how important it is for all of us to reach out to people that maybe we don't like consider a close friend or family member, maybe not someone that we're inclined to pick up the phone and call or exchange emails with, but those people who are in our lives who are like an important part of it. You know, maybe it's someone who's more of an acquaintance, people that you see pretty regularly that you haven't seen in a while. And how, you know, by working from home, again, there are some advantages and disadvantages, but one of the disadvantages is that you lose that network of acquaintances. It's like somewhere around like 10 to 15 people that you're interacting with every day who, you know, improve your quality of life and provide opportunities to socialize. So, you know, if you're one of those people who's going to continue working from home for a while because your office is closed, or maybe you just work from home all the looks pretty comfortable, I have to say. Take the time out to make those connections. I think there can be a real benefit for you, and certainly I know people would be excited to hear from you all. So you're going to hear more about the value of wearing your hard hat throughout the course of today's discussion and call. We have kind of 3 topics that we're going to cover today. First is we're going to hear a status update on 3 of our national priority projects. Uh-oh, my internet is unstable. Can you guys hear me? Ooh, awesome.
We could do a dance thing. That was synchronized. That was actually amazing. Wow.
Good.
All right, on 3.
So we're going to hear a little bit about 3 different priority projects. Gio is going to talk about improvements to the volunteer experience. Allie's going to talk a little bit about improvements that she's making to Salesforce and also make a request of everybody on the call. And then Angela's going to talk about improvements that she's making to the client experience at SBP. So each of them is going to talk for about 5 minutes or so. And then Tommy from New Orleans is going to give us an update on this week. As you all know, 2 weeks ago, we had staff out in the field in New Orleans returning to work. Tommy shared some of those experiences on the call last week. And then this week we had some of our members return to site. And so I'm really excited for him to share how that experience has been going. For those of you who are pretty soon going to be reopening offices and opening job sites, I think, you know, using Tommy as a resource and Dulcie as a resource, we really strongly encourage. So whether you're asking questions during this call or following up offline afterwards, I know that they have plenty to share and we'd be happy to talk to you. And then the sort of the bulk of our call, if you will, I'm really excited. JR and Ran have put together a presentation, and they're going to talk about leadership during COVID-19. And I think this is really important for all of us on the line, because whether you work with a team of people and you have folks who report up to you, or you are responsible for just leading yourself, I think there's a lot of really valuable and important guidance and hopefully lessons that we're going to learn from both JR and Rand that we can apply to both our professional lives. So more to come from JR and Rand in the second half of this call. So with that, I am going to pass it over to Gio to talk about improvements that she's making to the volunteer experience.
Where is she?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Liz. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Awesome. Love it. So nice to be able to see everybody's faces and connect faces with people I've been emailing with for a year. Hi, Dawn. So nice to see your face. The Volunteer Department Priority Project has been an opportunity for us to ask the important question of why are we doing things the way that we're doing them, and where can we improve to best reach success for our team, our volunteers, and ultimately our clients by being more effective in the outreach and engagement of volunteers and their inspiration to support our work of getting families back home. So the purpose of this project is to align all of our operating sites in best practices for volunteer management and all of that entails. So I'm very glad to say that every volunteer and community engagement manager has had an input in the brainstorming and the creation of what an ideal volunteer department should look like and the process of us getting there. So one of the great outcomes that we are working on is producing a unified language and understanding of what success looks like for SVP vis-a-vis volunteers, and a better way to communicate that vision clearly to our team members and to volunteers themselves. So we began this project with a lot of curious connecting about 6 months ago. And all that work culminated in an initial draft and suggestion for a standard volunteer manual. From there, Anya and I have been working closely with Liz, Zach, and senior leadership to create additional content, standardized trackers, and templates that we will use across sites, and making sure that all improvements are aligned with our different departments and the different national updates that we've all been doing, right, to improve our processes and improve our outcomes. So we have a timeline of finalizing all of this content by end of May, with all revised deliverables and formatting finalized to be able to roll out to all managers and all sites by the start of June. So this has been a very challenging, very gratifying journey, and I am this final product to all of you in about a month, and very excited to share it with you kind of where we're at. So that's a little bit of a summary, and I'd love to answer questions if anybody has them. Or invite any of the other people that have also been a part of this project to add anything if they'd like, because it truly has been a very, very collaborative experience. So yeah.
Let's make sure we give a shout out to Anya as well, who I think has been involved both structurally and big time in substance and content too. So great
Definitely.
work, and certainly great work, Gio.
Thank you. Yeah, Anya has been a superhero in really taking what we've done, what we started creating, and taking it to a whole different level. So thankful to have her as a teammate, like in general and in this project in particular.
And there's a question from Mark. It says, amazing work. Is there a strategy to update the manual moving forward as we continue to learn and grow?
I'll hop in here. So I think we have a lot of opportunity to learn and improve when it comes to um, creating rules around version control. So more to come on that, but we are thinking through how we can make this a living, breathing document, but limit the number of people who can actually make updates. So, I'm excited to roll this out, test it, and then come up with a way that we can make improvements and adjust it. But I'm also really excited because I think what Gio and Anya have done with a lot of really helpful guidance from Zach is to take a lot of the guesswork out of how volunteer coordinators and volunteer managers and even folks on the construction department should be interacting with volunteers. Like, what are those conversations? What should those conversations include? And how do we talk to people in such a way that when they finally get out to our job sites to start working and serving, they're very much aligned about like what success looks like and what we need for them to be doing day in and day out to achieve maximum results for our clients. And then also keeping them involved and engaged moving forward on fundraising and helping to spread the word and other things. So I think there's a lot of really good and I think helpful content that's going to reduce ambiguity for the team and result in a lot greater outcomes for our clients. So thank you again, Gio and Anya. We appreciate it. Lots of good shout outs. Thank you guys. Thanks for staying involved by using the chat function. Really appreciate it. All right, Allie, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Can everyone hear me? Yay. Hi, everyone. In case you don't know who I am, I know some of you, but not everyone. I'm Allie Briscoe, and I'm on the development team in New Orleans. I'm going to just briefly talk about Salesforce today and the new goals surrounding the systems upgrade. So as someone who worked with Salesforce daily entering donations, tracking communications with stakeholders, so the development side of things, realized just how powerful Salesforce could be. And we are obviously using it, but there are definitely more ways that we can leverage what we're currently doing to really maximize its potential. So now turned out to be a perfect time to really dive in and understand what changes could be done. And so as Gio just highlighted, the changes that they've been working on the volunteer side of things, Angela is going to discuss the changes on the client side of things. We've been working through not only what exists in our system, but our goal is to align the language and information that they're standardizing in the manuals and processes in Salesforce. So a huge thank you to Gio and Anya and Becca on the volunteer side and Angela on the client side, as well as those who have given the longer term vision. So Mark and Dulcie and Rebecca have provided a helpful compass and direction of what we hope to see in Salesforce down the line. So in the short term, our goal is to help standardize and align processes defined by ops, and so that everything is thoughtful and has a purpose. And then on the longer term side, really leverage the work that the teams are doing to make your job easier. So to work smarter, not harder. So eventually seeing dashboards, reporting automatically, so you know exactly what you've done, what you're doing, and then what you should be doing. So our goal is to make sure this is all aligned. Hopefully we will be rolling out these changes in the next 2 or 3 weeks, so keep an eye out for that. And then a super quick note. Previously, I sent out a request for photos for our 2019 annual report to our EDs. And we got some great photos, so big thank you to the sites for those. However, while I have everyone on the phone, I just wanted to make a request to the larger group to ask you to share your photos. So if you have photos on site, working with clients, volunteers, action-oriented photos, I would love to see those. And that's what I have to share. Thanks.
Allie, great work. This, I mean, you're so many SBP values in there: owning the route, steering through turbulence, connecting, unleashing work. Any feedback or questions for Allie at all?
Just thanks in advance for helping to make a lot of our processes more automated and make the system work better for everybody. I think it's going to reduce the amount of time folks are like using spreadsheets to pull together reports and various other things. So some of you might wonder how this is going to impact you, and hopefully for all of us, it's going to save us a little bit of time and create more accurate reports. So thanks, Allie. We really appreciate you.
There's a lot of feedback coming here, Allie. I don't know if you can see it, but this is like a Peloton class where someone did their 1,000th ride and people are going nuts. So great work, Allie. Great work. Oh my goodness. Amazing work. Reducing waste. Good job. Takes a lot of curious connecting. This work will allow us to update existing data. Oh, that's a question.
Great question from Dulcie.
Sorry, I guess that's what question marks mean. Will this allow us to go backwards and update standardized existing data, or is this looking forward only?
I think we had intended it to be forward thinking. So using what the processes and language in the manual that are currently being developed by the client side and the volunteer side. So not necessarily retroactively going back and adding that data and changing everything, because we don't want to add a huge retroactive lift. It would definitely be more forward thinking.
Great. And then there's a note from Foofy saying, please don't forget to look in your phones for all the photos. I'd love to take it one step further and have us reach out to our team members, AmeriCorps members, and volunteers. I mean, wouldn't it be a good campaign, Foofy, to say from home, send pictures of what you've done to help other people get home? I mean, that could be a super, super duper cool, whether contest or engagement or something. If we can blast out the list SBP over the years, and maybe we send some t-shirts or stickers or coffee mugs or hand sanitizer to participants. So wherever Foofy is, there you are, upper right. Will you think about that? Thumbs up. Great work. Allie, great work. Great idea, Zach. That's well done, Foofy. Allie's an unsung hero. And we need screen caps. Don't know what that means for this incredible group of leaders. Great.
All right. Thanks, everybody. So, Angela, I'm going to hand it off to you and ask that you talk a little bit about the important work that you're doing to both standardize and improve the client experience at SBP.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah, cool. Awesome. So I think I know pretty much everybody on the call, but for those of you who don't, I'm Angela. I'm the ED in New York. Very nice to meet you. Hope you're all doing really well. It's finally really beautiful out on the East Coast, so that's been really nice. So I've been working on the client service standardization. You've already heard a little bit from Gio on the volunteer side and from Allie on obviously the Salesforce component. So historically, coming from the same place that Gio was saying, just from a goal of identifying and fortifying homeowners against their breaking point and making sure that we're utilizing the client services function to be more efficient with that mission. So from there, I have a few components that we're working on. So we're utilizing the MOM rule and really taking a trauma-informed approach to communicating with our clients and making sure that that tone is set throughout the entirety of the client process, while still setting expectations around making sure that clients are going to be active participants throughout. So that's been like a key theme that we're infusing into everything. From there, we are, just as an example, we're creating like circle of objection activities that are going to be incorporated into the ultimate CSC manual, so that when a new CSC does come on board, they're ready and they've practiced having these common conversations. So that's just like one example of something that's going to be embedded into the manual. in addition to that, and maybe a bit bigger, we're refining and standardizing the entirety of the client process, similar again to Gio. I'm very glad she went first, making sure that from the intake to the sign-off, everything is standardized across SBP operating sites. That doesn't mean that, you know, some things are going to be different at each site, but we want to know this is what success looks like for the client process. So from there, our next component that kind of ties into that is standardizing the actual client services manual. Shout out to Amanda, who has been instrumental in helping craft that. And now Anya, which I cannot thank enough, helping with content, helping with editing, and just making sure that this is what we want it to be. The manual is going to kind of surface a few things. So defining success for what the client experience actually is at SBP, surfacing issues. So that'll allow us to then surface issues if we have a new member and they're early on in their training, understanding what they need to work on or what they're doing really well at. And then also just having one clear, concise manual that covers the needs of not just the client services department, because we all know there's so much overlap with construction, with volunteer, with even the finance and development teams. So just getting all of that to be consolidated, and then creating training deliverables around, again, CSC training and standardization. So I think that's like the genesis of the manual. And from there, again, Ali and Anya with the Salesforce standardization. So making it more efficient. And I think understanding that some of it on there might be repetitive and that there might be information missing that we'd love to collect more of or be able to more easily access reporting data on. So getting Salesforce cleaned up there. And then in terms of rollout and when we're expecting this to happen, we're hoping for the first week of June will be when we roll this out to all EDs and their client service managers or community engagement managers, which from there, we'll give them some time to review it and then have regular check-ins with ultimately another 30-day check-in to see how it's being utilized. But I don't know, I think that was a little bit short of my 5 minutes, but if you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer.
Just one thing to add. Executive directors and anyone who's a community engagement manager may have heard both Gio and Angela say around the beginning of June, I promise we're gonna not make you learn 2 new processes in the same week. So more to come on the timing, but I just want to make sure you guys all understand that we want to give you and your teams time to both learn and apply. And so we will definitely space those out.
And a great question from Hannah Roberts in New Orleans. Is there a different type of client standardization for opportunity houses versus owner-occupied homes for both the client and the client services coordinator, or does this mostly relate to owner-occupied housing? I don't know. Angela.
I mean, I think the idea is to make everything as standard and in one lane as possible. And then we know there's going to be like riffing off of that. New York also has another program other than our owner-occupied program that certainly isn't going to fit into this. So we know that that's the reality, but we still want to have one standard lane to be able to follow.
Great. And Foofy is asking a question. Is the trauma-informed approach new for us, or are other groups using this approach? Sounds really impactful and something we should talk about externally.
Yeah, I love that question, Foofy. I think it's more of a like culture conversation than like how do we just infuse this into the client manual. I think starting with the client manual and our clients like certainly makes sense, but I think it's ultimately more of like a culture shift. I don't know. I mean, it's very possible that other NGOs are doing this. I would hope that they are. And we've like done a bit of research. Sarah has been really helpful there. And Claire, who was an intern in New Orleans, was really great. And Becca has been super helpful in like spearheading all of that. But I think we're starting with how we communicate with clients, and then hopefully it goes out from there.
Great. Awesome work, Angela. Tremendous leadership. Great teamwork. And let's highlight it. Someone just said, love the female input. How about female leadership? Indeed. This is great.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. We really appreciate all the work that you and others have done on this. And I think it's going to go a long way in ensuring that we do a better job of communicating to clients what exactly it is that how we can support them on their rebuilding journey, and then create consistency both across all the operating sites and within sites, and how different members of our team interact with clients to ensure the most positive and the most impactful experience for them. Thank you.
Greatly. The future of SVP.
All right. I just want to say thanks in advance to JR and Ran. I know last week when JR, it says my internet connection's stable. Can you hear me? Or unstable? Okay, wow, look at all those thumbs. That when JR hopped on the line, we got a lot of like instantaneous smiles.
He's like, got it.
Yeah. So I'm really happy to have him here again to share just a ton of great experience and perspective with the group. I'm also really excited to give Ran the mic today. I know that many of you know he's been working on Reese's team, but not many of us have had an opportunity to hear directly from him. So I will pass it off so that we get maximum amount of time with our two colleagues here. Thank you both.
And JR, if you can unmute yourself, I'm sorry I didn't do that before I made Ran the host. At the bottom left corner of the screen is the little microphone button. If you click that, you'll be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you all for giving us the opportunity to talk. And we're appreciative of that. What we'll do here is I'll talk the first part of this, and then I'll pass it over to Ragnar, and he'll talk through the second piece. And just a few points before we begin talking about this that I'd just like to lay out there. The sources of this briefing are threefold. First and foremost, if you follow the Harvard Business Review, and I'll encourage you to do that, they do publish a lot of articles on leadership and specifically leadership in crisis. Now, a lot of their articles, candidly, are crap. So be careful what you're reading and make sense of it, but they do produce a lot of really good stuff. The second source is that Rand and I both taught leadership in our military career, and many of the ideas that come from this are coming from a course that I used to teach many, many years ago, unfortunately before some of you were born, back at the Old Armor and Cavalry School, and it was a course that I used to teach in combat leadership. So that's the second source. The third source is that we've had lots and lots of discussions about this. How do you reopen? How do you come back into society? How do you go back about doing the good business and the good work that we need to do? Because we're in a position here now where, my goodness, I mean, 70,000 American citizens have died. And now we look around and it's a worldwide crisis. And it is scary. So what we're going to talk about here today is we're going to talk about leadership in crisis and uncertainty. And we're going to talk about the first thing that we're going to talk about is this idea of mental toughness. And mental toughness is the ability to resist, manage, overcome doubts, worries, concerns, and that keep or prevent you from succeeding at something. So mental toughness is something that I would is the theme of everything we're going to talk about here today. And before I jump to the first slide and begin talking more about mental toughness, I need to say that this is a we thing. It is not a me thing. And so when you think about what's all taking place in the world today, I need you to think about it in terms of we as opposed to me. So with that, let's go to the next chart. And what I will say to you here is that it is absolutely paramount to all of us that we control our mind. The first step in mental toughness is to control your own mind. The first person you lead every morning when you wake up is you. And the most important organ in your body is your brain. So what I will submit to all of you is that, the world is scary and there's a lot of things going on out there, but your locality, what is around you, is more important than what is taking place in the world. And I will encourage you to have a good plan for today, and then you wake up tomorrow morning and you do the same thing. Don't worry about tomorrow. You can't control it. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then do all you can to keep your eyes focused on the present. So we're going to be in the present. We're going to be, as Zach used to say, in the moment. And when you're in that moment, what I need you to be able to do is focus on your current mission. That's all things that are near and around you, all things local, not necessarily national. It's real easy in this day and age when you're sitting at home all day to become a news junkie. And you listen to this news and it comes in both ears simultaneously. And you can get information overload. But if you look around you right now, wherever you're sitting, wherever you're hearing my voice from, that's local. So I would ask that you focus on the local and on the here and now. So this is a part of this thing called mental toughness. And this part of controlling our brain is important. Now, in the last decade or so, there's been a great deal of study about this thing called emotional quotient. It used to be, when I was a kid, it was about your IQ, and now it's about your EQ. But one of the biggest parts about your EQ is your ability to control your mind, to be able to be in charge of the thoughts that you are having, to be specifically focused on the ability to discern the difference between facts and opinions, the ability to be mature. Look, we're all going to fail at some point, okay? So let's all get past that. And then when we say that, we're all going to fail, then we get back up, we dust ourselves off, and we keep going. So with that, that's your wear your hard hat value. And, we have to take an active role in creating a safe work environment. And that's something, again, this is going, as we go further and further into this is going to be more of a we thing than it ever is a me thing. So we take an active role in that. Next chart, please. So what we're attempting to do here and wear a hard hat is control our fear. If we fail to control our fear takes control of us. Now, I want to put you into a scenario or a thought here about fear. And I'll tell you a little story. So it's story time with JR here as we go through this, all right? So many years ago in the 70s and 80s, there were a series of horror movies that used to come out, right? And those horror movies had scantily clad women in them, and scantily clad women would cause me to go to the Strand Theater in Waynesville, North Carolina, and pay my $1 to watch that scary movie. That scary movie was so scary. Those horror movies were so amazing to me that, it was as if they had jumped off of the screen and slapped me in my chair right there in the middle of Waynesville, North Carolina, because it had so suspended reality from me. Well, that's fear, right? So fear happens, and this is from a movie in Hollywood, which is 1,000,000 miles away. So fear is a natural thing, and folks, we can spread fear. We can spread it from one to another without being too overly sensitive about this. I have seen fear spread, and it spreads like a panic, like a cancer. It goes from one person to the next. And when that happens, what happens to us is that we lose all control of what's happening to us. So what I would say to you is that your fear is natural, but having said that, you cannot let that fear control you. If you ever get to the point in life to where you're afraid to step to the left or afraid to step to the right, then you're just standing still. Well, what you're doing there is you're letting that fear control you, and you are no longer living. So what I would say to you is that, we as good citizens, and we've got a mission, we've got disaster survivors out there that need our help. And we're going to continue on as we continue opening up across America. And as we do that, we can't let our fears control our lives. We've got to control that fear. And again, that is part of controlling your mind. And it's certainly a part of this thing we call mental toughness. Now, let's jump down to the next topic area, which is risk. You don't have to live every day to know that we take a risk every single day. If I'm out in Columbia and I'm walking down Gervais Street, I will watch the traffic. I'll look to my left. I'll look to my right. I'll punch the button on the machine that makes the light turn red. All those things mitigate my risk. And that's what we're going into now. Another example, if you're fortunate enough to be with Zach and Gio in Puerto Rico, you will always, always, always wear your seatbelt. Not that I say anything bad about my dear friends from Puerto Rico, because I love you all. You're a great team. You people do need a lot of driving lessons. But what I did was I risk mitigated, and I risk mitigated because I had to put on my seatbelt. We do that every day, folks. That's what we do. We risk mitigate everything in our world. And if we're not risk mitigating, then I will argue that we're probably failing, okay? So we know we're going to have risk, right? We know we have risk on the job site anyway. You know, it is foolish for us to go to a job site and not wear our goggles when we're using a nail gun, okay? That is protective equipment, right? And now, as things change, we will continue to mitigate our risk. And that's something we've got to do each and every day. So let's go to the next chart, and let's talk a little bit about unleashing it. Discipline, ladies and gentlemen, is my favorite word, okay? If you don't believe that, you can call my 25-year-old, and he will certainly attest to the fact that that is my favorite word. Now, most people, when you think of the word discipline, you get it in your head that discipline is a terrible, terrible, terrible bad thing. You think, well, I've got sent to the principal's office, or I'm getting a speeding ticket, or some bad thing is happening to me with discipline. Well, that's just not the case. Discipline, by definition, is doing the right thing regardless of who's watching. You know, the truth is that when you think about discipline, it's easy to be disciplined when my boss is standing over my shoulder with a checklist saying, you did this, you did this, you did this, you did this. Discipline is doing the right thing regardless of who is watching me. And so what happens to us is that, you know, we don't need our bosses to look over our shoulders to tell us to do the right thing. If this getting out of this coronavirus requires us to wash our hands 67 times a day, then we'll wash our hands 67 times a day. And the thing that is interesting to me about discipline, and I'll give you a short military scenario. When a military formation is in combat, it'll form a perimeter at night or in the early morning hours, and it will set out LPOPs, so listening post, observation post, basically guards, if you will, to guard the main body so that the main body can rest. And we have an expectation from those guards. The expectation we have from them is that they'll stay awake, is that they will do the right thing without having a squad leader, a sergeant, or a platoon leader, a captain, or a full bird colonel standing looking over their shoulder. We expect them to stay awake and to give us pre-warning if the enemy is coming. That's the definition of discipline. That's doing the right thing regardless of who is watching. In this day and age, we all must have the self-discipline to watch out for ourselves and our teammates. Because again, this is a we thing, not a me thing. So when we talk about this idea of discipline, what we're talking to ourselves about is doing the right thing all the time. And it's more important, I have to do the right thing. Zach has got to do the right thing. All of us have to do the right thing. And we're going to put out, as an organization, a lot of guidance and guidelines that'll talk about how we do this when we reintegrate ourselves into the world. The mission's not going to stop. We still have people out there that we've got to get to, that we've got to help. But so the mission's not stopping. So what have we got to be able to do? Well, we've got to be disciplined in our execution. Now, discipline is an interesting little thing here. Let's go to the next chart. And let's talk about time matters. All right. We have to own our own route in this. And folks, this is an individual responsibility. It is a collective responsibility, but it's also an individual responsibility. So what has to happen is if I'm washing my hands and I'm following all the PPE requirements, and Zach's following all the PPE requirements, but Liz is not, what Liz has done is she has violated that trust to the team. So as a leader, as a person in this, what we've got to be able to do collectively as an organization is all of us have to be committed to this individual responsibility. I owe it to me, I owe it to all of you, and I owe it to all my teammates. If I have a fever before I walk out of the house in the morning and I walk into our workplace, then folks, I'm a potential carrier for this. And that's unacceptable. So what I have done is I failed in discipline, and I failed in the individual responsibility for caring for myself, and I'm then bringing harm to my teammates. And I think the next bullet down there is ownership. You know, each one of us has to take an individual ownership in all of this, and we have to own our individual and then our collective responsibility as we open back up and move forward. So with that, let's go to the next chart. And now we're still talking about time matters and honoring our root, but let's just say this. Look, folks, there's no silver bullet to this. The only thing that I'm telling you is that if we are a disciplined people and a disciplined workforce, we will accomplish our mission. There's no one single answer that's going to make this. And I'm here to tell you, we may go out on day one and start trying to do a bunch of stuff and say, you know what, that's not working for us. So we have to have the mental toughness to adjust and make changes as required and to keep our focus on our own internal battle space. So with that, let's go to the next chart. I know that the executive directors are sick to death of this. They've heard it 1,000 times, and I can't see Glenn on the screen right now, but I'm fairly confident that he's vomiting in his own mouth because he's heard this 1,000 times. So Glenn, here you go. You're going to get it one more time, Hoss. So this is about the 3 outcomes. You know, crisis and uncertainty bring turbulence, and we counter turbulence with leadership. So leadership is this action of leading other people, and a leader will only provide 3 outcomes. That's it. There are no more. They provide the outcome of purpose, motivation, and direction. You've heard me say this 1,000 times. You can have a lot of purpose in an organization. You can have a lot of motivation, but without direction, you're not going to go anywhere. So leaders have to provide the adequate amounts of purpose, motivation, and direction. On the right-hand side of the screen, you see the 2 outcomes of management. The 2 outcomes of management, and there are only 2, and that's effectiveness and efficiency. The more effective and efficient we are as an organization, the more money we make, the more people we put in houses. And so you got 2 outcomes. So now we lead people and we manage things. And in this particular case, we've got to manage the people who will use the things to get to our outcomes. And when I talk about this, the leadership thing in the center there, leaders in this day and age, we absolutely must have clarity in communications, and we absolutely must have unity of effort. Those are the things that we have to provide. So be cognizant of the fact that this chair that I'm sitting in is an inanimate object, and I can try to stand up here in front of all of you and give this chair purpose, and I can give it motivation, and I can give it direction. But the chair, again, an inanimate object, it's not going to move anywhere until I physically get up and move it. But people have feelings and thoughts and ambitions and fears, and we have to address those as leaders. So the thing that I will point to you now is that as leaders in SBP, it's incumbent upon all of us to provide our folks with purpose, motivation, and direction. And again, my view is the greatest of these is direction. Don't forget that we lead people and we manage things. And you're going to have a lot of folks in your workforce who are going to be coming to you now saying, wow, I'm not comfortable with this, or I'm not comfortable with that. That's the time when we absolutely have to look them in the eye, and we have to take the mental toughness that life has given us and give it to other people. And folks, that's also leadership. So let's go to the next chart. And this is my favorite. This is
JR,
sure.
Can you reverse for one? This is incredibly rich, valuable. Just go back one.
Yes, sir.
I can't tell you how helpful and clear I think this is. I'm thrilled to have your leadership and inspiration. I want to pause you for a sec to see if people have questions in applying this. So before we get too far through some other meaty concepts, do you mind if we just, even if we run over in time,
Yes, sir.
if we pause, let people present some scenarios and get your advice or counsel or feedback. So who wants to present, JR, either with a challenge or with a scenario and get some feedback or guidance on ways to navigate through it? And feel free at this point, if Kyle lets you, just to unmute yourself instead of doing something else.
Robert asked if these slides can be shared with the team.
Of course. Yeah, we'll talk later about rolling it out to all SBP. Liz and JR have a vision. But as people who manage people and other people who lead, some who do both, what questions or who wants to present a scenario to JR?
I think I bored everybody to death.
I'll throw one out. We had this the other day from Florida. What if I am not the person in charge?
And we danced around that answer, Ragnar, when we gave it back to them. What we have in organizations oftentimes is we have things called informal leaders. So you might see a hierarchical organization, and there might be somebody who is in charge, but there may be somebody in the formation who is an informal leader. If you want to find an informal leader, just go out to any basketball court and sit on the side and you'll watch. And in a few minutes, you'll see who's getting the game together, who's leading it, and the informal leaders will just pop out at you. And informal leaders, what we have to do to them is we have to find those people who are informal leaders, who lead their peers naturally. And we have to, and I'm going to use a word here, and I don't you think that I'm coming from a mafia background here, but we've got to coerce them. We've got to bring them into our field. We've got to bring them into our realm. And we've got to say, look, I need you to be on this team. And then you can use them by giving them, more purpose, more motivation, more direction, lead them personally. And in doing so, you're making another leader. And what happens to you then is you brought more into the fold. So that was an excellent question we had the other day when we briefed part of this in the LPC virtual course. Thanks, Rand. So with that, if we have other questions, we can take them. If not, I'll just continue to push on because I need to get here to to Rand. So let's go to the next chart. This is my chart. This is what I use. I call it my Felicia chart. Wonderful lady that used to work for me, and I used to take this chart out and show it to her a couple of times, and she refers to it herself as the Felicia chart. But what it says is that, in this world that we live in today, the centerpiece is what I can control. This is what I can control physically in this organization. I can control me. And I have influence, right? And the higher you go in the organization, the more influence you have. So you can get on the phone and you can influence people. You can pick up the phone and you can call somebody who is a decision maker. But what you end up saying is that, so you've got control and then you've got influence, but beyond that, that blue line ought to go all the way around the world. You can't control it. And what you cannot control, if you spend your entire adult life worrying about things that you cannot control, I'll submit to you that you stop living. You then become a worrier. Now, I need to say that worry, in my humble but highly accurate opinion, is different than fear, but worry is also contagious. I don't know if you've ever been around a person who is a full-time worrier, but what happens is that they'll take that worry and they'll spread it, right? And it goes from person to person. We don't need that, right? So we control what we can control during this crisis. We influence what we can influence during this crisis. And folks, everything beyond that, that's out of our control. So let's not spend a great deal of time and energy on it. Let's go to the next chart, Rand. So I need to speak to this because this is important, because this is a leader trap that you could very easily fall into. And it's the seduction of management, right? The Harvard Business Review writes a lot of articles when they talk about this idea that management can be seductive. And what happens to us is that it seduces us into micromanagement or over-centralization in our response to things. Now, you're going to get a war story. So here you go. And it's a self-confessional war story, so hang with me. A long time ago, far, far away place, and my first time in combat, I was a company commander for C Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, the Cotton Balers. The Cotton Balers were the ones who stood behind their cotton bales at New Orleans with Andrew Jackson and held the line there and beat the British off. I wasn't there in 1812, Mark Smith, regardless of what you're thinking right now. So I was in combat, and I had a platoon that was in combat. They were in a firefight off to my extreme left flank, and I began just letting that blue platoon, and I began letting the blue platoon leader have it, and telling him exactly what he needed to do, exactly how he needed to do it. And man, I was putting the egg in his mouth and then telling him exactly when to suck it. Now, all that did was cause frustration for me, and it caused frustration for him. And candidly, it caused a lot more stress on his team because they're still trying to answer to everything I'm throwing at them, everything he's trying to throw at him. And he's busy. He knows exactly what to do. He is trained. He is disciplined. He's doing fine over there. But it was me. I was the problem. The problem was with me in that I felt like I was losing control of the situation. And in my efforts, when I saw that I was losing control of it, or had the perception I was losing control of it, I attempted immediately to over control it. And all I did was piss him off, and it didn't do any good whatsoever. He did just fine over there. And this is one of the greatest self-actualization lessons that I ever had. There are certain things that you just cannot control. So there's no need for me to get on the phone and chew you out over something that you don't have any control over either. Or you do have control and you're doing everything you can, you know. So we do the best that we can in our individual and collective efforts, and that's all we can do. And once again, I'll ask you, please don't forget the human factors in this. We have to provide as leaders purpose, motivation, and direction. We have to be the folks who calm others. We have to be the ones with the mental toughness. If you're hearing my voice right now, you have mental toughness. Okay, you have been through life, and life itself will make you tough. Life itself, has a tendency sometimes to punch us all in the nose. Well, we have an obligation to those who are younger than us to teach them a little bit about mental toughness. About this idea that we have to have an ability to resist and to manage, to overcome doubts and worries and concerns and fears that prevent us from succeeding. So with that, let's go to the next chart. And this is the basis of all relationships. I know that many of you have heard me say this time and again, but trust is everything. Trust is the entire fulcrum that everything else, it's the power and movement, the hub of all power and movement upon which everything else rests. In good leadership climates, there's a lot of trust. What we've got to have as we go back to work is the teammates have to trust each other. I used the example earlier. If Zach, Liz, and I are on a team, all three of us must be doing the right disciplined things, taking individual responsibility, because we are now taking collective responsibility. And again, one more time, this is a we thing. It's not a me thing. So we have to trust one another, and we have to be clear and concise in our communications, especially leaders. So what we want to do is I want you to imagine in your head a horizon, and across the teammates who are out there working, I need there to be trust there. And then that's called horizontal bonding and horizontal trust. And then I need there to be vertical trust that goes straight up, that trust that goes up the chain of command to where we're looking at the construction site manager saying, you know what, she's out here for our best interest, and she's doing the things that are doing to help us collectively stay safe while we're doing this mission that's so important. But it requires us all to be disciplined. It requires us all to control our fear. All of us are afraid of something. I'm scared to death of copperhead snakes, right? I don't mind rattlesnakes because they'll sing at me. But copperheads, those are nasty little bad language, and they need to go away. So all of us are afraid of something. You got to control that fear, and then you got to risk mitigate it. So anytime I'm mowing a pasture that may have copperheads in it, I'm attuned. I've got good situational awareness. I'm focused, and I'm prepared to see them before they see me. So all of us here, I don't know how I got off on copperheads. All of us, I got to mow, I think, this weekend. So, all right. So all of us have to take individual responsibility, and all of us have to take ownership of those responsibilities. So we have to trust everybody on our team, and they have to trust us to do the same. And that's the environment that we're trying to set as we go back to work. Then none of this is easy. Again, no silver bullets. Ragnar, next chart. So I'm going to pass now to Rand, and I think that he's going to take over on this and take you the rest of the way, and we'll answer questions when you're done. So with that, off to you, Ragnar.
All right, can everybody hear me? Awesome. All right. Look, I've got 9 kids. I've been married almost 32 years. I can tell you communications is probably 99% of all problems in my household. It is 90% of all human problems, and it is just something that you continuously have to improve, something you continuously have to do. As we start the process of going back out into the field, we will have to continue to communicate across the entire organization. I think SBP has done a great job. I've felt fully informed where I sit in Columbia, South Carolina, that we're continuing to pass what's going on, changes up and down the chain of command. We got to do it across all components of a team. You know, sometimes we might look at the team that's in the field, but forget about the admin guy behind. And you've got to include them into what's going on so they can answer questions. And you've got to be able to keep everybody, both as JR alluded to before, horizontally and vertically informed. Across the entire organization, everybody needs to know what is going on. Having been a private in the United States Army at one time, I hated not knowing what was going on. Why am I sitting here on this airfield? Why am I in this plane? Where are we going? You know, I loved it when leaders would come and say, look, this is what we're doing. And, you know, think about just talking in terms of the 5 W's, who, what, where, when, and the 1 H of how. And then, of course, the W for why. And always, you know, communication needs to be clear. It needs to be concise. Consistent. You can't have one part of an organization say something and then another part say something different. It's always got to be synchronized, and it makes sure that it's consistent across the organization, and being transparent. I like cards on the table. I like knowing what's going on and seeing it. And you've got to focus on being positive, especially in a time of uncertainty and crisis. You have got to keep a positive spin on what you're talking about in order to reassure people. You know, there was a commercial years back said, you don't let them see you sweat. So when you talk, you try to accentuate the positive of what's going on. And now here are some leadership basics, some things that JR and I have learned over the years that we kind of did a top 10 sort of, and I'm going to share these with you. Acknowledge people's fears and then encourage to resolve them. Look, you know, things we're going to do. People are going to be scared, as JR talked about fear. There's going to be risk. People have different experiences. You know, I've done a lot of crazy things, jumped out of planes, swam with sharks. I'm not scared of copperhead snakes. I am scared of being really, really, really sick and not being able to move around. So my fear is going to change how I come to work and how I perform. And so the fears that people come to work with, they just need to be encouraged that you're taking all the right steps as a leader and that these things can be resolved and deal with it. In fact, not necessarily always opinion, you know, the probabilities of someone, you know, really, if you looked at the probabilities, you probably would never go to your bathroom or drive a car because that's probably your most likely chance of having an accident in your home and in life. Build predictability and stability into work. People like to do the same things. They like knowing what they're coming to do. And the more you can build predictability and stability, the less uncertainty there is. And that's a great way to eliminate it from people's minds. Freud said in his later days that everybody wanted to be loved and have meaningful work. So if you give everybody a role and a purpose, they're going to go out and do well. People want to have something to do and a goal to achieve. Especially your type A's, they like to conquer things. So if you give them a mission, they'll go out and it'll put, as they're on the job, it'll leave those fears will be in the back of their mind. Leaders absolutely have to be present. Not only do they have to be present, they have to be visible and they have to be available for people. A good rule of thumb that I always went by is where are most of my people or where is the most danger? That's where I went. Good rule of thumb, praise in public. If you're going to congratulate somebody for a great job, you do it in public. If they're stinking it up, you pull them behind closed doors and you counsel them in private so they don't lose face and they aren't ashamed in front of their peers. And when you're doing it, don't be a jerk. JR had a more colorful word, but I changed it to jerk. And so when you're correcting someone, keep it in terms of what standard they have violated. Always keep it professional, keep it business. Don't ever make it personal. And speaking of standards, you've got to enforce them. If you're a leader, you're on the job site, you walk by somebody, they don't have the proper PPE, and you let it go, you just set a new standard. You've got to enforce standards. And you make sure, it starts with the individual and it continues to go, especially for leaders. And follow the standards. You've got to set the example as a leader in everything you do. If you're going to demand people wear PPE, you need to put it on yourself when you go to the work site. Keep people informed. I spoke about communication prior to this slide, and it's very important to keep people informed about what's going on, both above, where they're at, and maybe even below, just to let people know what's going on for the people who are working for them. And last but not least, know your people. Know when your people are out of character. If somebody comes to the job site and they're not acting like they normally do, you know something is up. And that is when, as a leader, you need to go to them, and hopefully you've built that trust, because as JR said, leadership is built on trust. You've built that trust that you can find out perhaps the problem is just a fear of being on the work site, or maybe something's going on in their life. But as a leader, you need to address it and see what you can do to resolve that, whether it's fear or it's an issue. So with that, I will open it up for questions.
Well, thank you all so much. Rand and I appreciated the opportunity to do this. So we thank you for being kind to us and listening to us talk about this for a little while.
Well, so let's have a round of applause for JR and Rand's investment in this, their service to our country, and their participation in SBP. We got some raising the roofs, we got some hand clapping, we got some snapping, we got some nodding. There was one comment that I thought was especially poignant, not surprised it came from Cam. Cam, maybe you want to unpack it, about the best self-care is discipline. Do you want to unpack that? And then we'll go to Viviana, who had a specific question. Then if other people have questions, we'll hop into. This is just a wonderful opportunity to access tremendous leadership. So Cam, why don't you go first?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I had said in the comment where exactly that quote came from. I think it might have been someone that was on Joe Rogan's podcast, but I like to think of it as similar to another rule that people talked about taking care of yourself like you're taking care of someone else. I think practicing self-discipline is kind of putting that into motion. So it means, like you were talking about, sweating every day. That's definitely takes self-discipline. Any of those things that are going to be good for yourself and good for the whole of society is going to take self-discipline, because it's easy to just sit down and watch TV or whatever. But yeah, it takes actual work to get things done.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. And, my favorite word, of course, is discipline. And I say that because, the most successful people that I have ever known or met or been around are all disciplined people. They make very, very deliberate decisions. They're disciplined to do the right thing. And, oftentimes we don't need somebody to stand over our shoulder and tell us what to do. We need to do the right thing just because it's the right thing to do, right? And we don't need to be necessarily praised for it or punished for it if nobody knows. But, at the end of the day, you just got to do the right thing. I think it's a brilliant comment, young man. Thank you.
And for those struggling with self-discipline, there's a book that we read at SBP that could be really helpful called The Big Leap. Because we're worth it, right? We're worth investing in ourselves. And when you think about it, so many times we don't. There's things that are good for us, that we're good at, that feel good, that are good for our existence. And sometimes we prioritize other stuff. It's human. So I really encourage folks to read The Big Leap. If you want to talk about it with me or anyone else, would love to hear your thoughts. It's a book that, just for my life as a person was very, very helpful. So Cam, thanks for bringing that up. I will think about that quote considerably, really helpful. Viviana had a question, and her question was, I believe it's up there because there was so much accolades for these guys, like 5 pages up, but it was to the effect of, there she is. What's a good example of clear communication? What's not a good example of clear communication? Is that right, Viviana? And feel free to unmute yourself.
Well, first of all, I am a big fan of JR, and now I'm of Rand, so great presentation. I was kind of wondering more of what, like, give me some examples on how can we can be more clarity in communication, because I think sometimes we think we're very, very, very clear, but how can we guarantee that?
Yeah.
You want that one?
No, you take it.
Okay. There's a couple ways, you know, I've worked with people who thought they were very clear in communication. And then I would point out that, look, what you're saying is way above the heads. You know, having dealt in South Carolina disaster recovery with the LMI population, our LMI population was not as educated as we initially thought. And so it took a young man
It certainly did.
to point out to us that, look, you need to write not for a bunch of college people, but you really need to write somewhere between the 5th to 10th grade. So we changed how we wrote things that went out to the public. A historical example I use, if you ever want to check your communication, is Napoleon. There was a thing called Napoleon's Corporal. And what he would do is his generals would come up with a plan, and then he would bring in a soldier, just a normal soldier, and have him listen to the plan. And if he understood what it was supposed to happen, then he would give the plan a thumbs up. So sometimes if you think in your communications, maybe not, you know, you keep having, and Lord, this happens with me and my wife a lot. I will say something thinking I'm given clear intent here, clear direction in leading what I want done. And because I maybe used words, acronyms that she wasn't familiar with, it got messed up. Or I didn't give it as clearly as I wanted. So sometimes a technique is to have her tell me, you can have the person tell you back what you want. Another thing is have somebody else read what you're going to send out, especially like if you're sending out like an important email that you're sending out to a group of people, maybe have somebody else look at it and say, I understand what you're saying. Or have them read back to you, hey, what do you think I'm saying? And like, don't try to, I mean, I'm anti-verbose. I like short, to the point, give me the big 5 W's. I'm probably too short sometimes in my language, which is a good counter because JR is very well written. He's like a Tolstoy on Grammarly, whereas I'm like Dr. Seuss, I think. So it's a good partnership. But that's just some ideas on what I would do. I hope that was helpful.
Great example. There's another question. These guys are great. Where have they been hiding? That is a state secret. We cannot share the answer to that question, but yes, they have been and will be on all future calls.
Yeah, the other thing about communication is that when we're talking to people, it's always best to do face-to-face, but we talk a lot with our body language. So leaders have to watch their body language. Leaders have to know when you're having a conversation with somebody, if I sit like this and I'm all angry and puffed up, then I'm giving even if I'm calm, I'm still giving an angry and puffed up view of the world. And the other part is that when you work together as a team for a long time, you begin to pick up on each other's language. You worked long enough together with each other so you begin to know when one of the people in the team is in character or out of character. I can tell when Rand is having an off day, and he certainly knows very well when I'm having an off day. So that's just the idea that, when we're around people, we need to be attuned to one another. And so the written communication is probably the hardest because we're distributed now in this COVID world. We're all over the map. And so the idea that when we send an email to somebody, I don't know how many of you in here have gotten a text at some point or another, and it just made you so mad. And the person who sent it had no intention of sending you something snippy. But then you know, being the immature the person that you are, you snipped it back at them, and now we've got a contest going on of who can be meaner to the other person. You know, so life's about responding to things, not reacting. And we need to just take the time, oftentimes, before we send anything out. Of course, we use Clee a lot. Just say, Clee, does this make sense? And you know, she's an expert at all this. So, but we want to be clear in our written communication, and we need to be, you know, candid and nice to people. And I think I saw it flash up there. You know, the number one key to leadership, of course, in communications is for a leader is always say what you mean and mean what you say.
There's a great question from Chad. Kudos, Chad, for asking this question. I think it's both courageous and insightful. It's it moved. Trust is the hardest thing to earn from another person. As leaders, how do we approach someone that has maybe lost our trust?
Yeah.
Or that we have lost trust in?
Absolutely.
What a great question, Chad.
Boy, that's a great question. You know, we have to be, you know, the two ways that we build trust, or we say what we mean what we say. That is character. We have to be transparent in all of our actions as leaders. Everybody has to know where we stand on just about every issue that's associated with our workplace. The second thing that makes us a successful leader who's building trust is that we have good judgment. You absolutely have got to make good decisions. And, you know, we teach the model of weighing your options and making sure that you're making good, deliberate, disciplined decisions, that you're weighing options, that you're analyzing it, you're thinking through things. Oftentimes in a fear environment, you won't do that quite as well. You become the person in the Fright House, you know, the movie with Jamie Lee Curtis and scantily clad women, and you're scared to death. Nobody in that house made a good decision all night long. So don't be like that. That's fear influencing. But back to the direct question, you know, it's a really good question. How do I rebuild trust? Well, you know, that's tough. It's tough in all relationships. Look, I mean, if I were to ask all of you right now to think about the best leader that you ever served with anywhere, he or she, and think about their qualities, you would eventually come back and say, I trusted that person. Conversely, if I were to say to you, I want you to think about the worst leader that you ever served with, wherever you were at, whatever you were doing, I venture to say that you would eventually come back and say, you know what? I lost trust in them. Now, let's go to relationships. All right. Anybody ever had a bad relationship? All right. Let's see who's brave. Will raise their hand. If you've ever had a bad relationship anywhere in your life, my gut tells me that it was probably because there was a break of trust. So you're asking me the question, how do I rebuild trust? Well, if you lose trust in anybody that's working for you, that's a leader action. You now need to provide the direction to that person to bring them back into task. Or you need to let them go. That's the bottom line. Now, if they have lost trust in you because you've done something, folks, that just takes time. You know, trust is the hardest thing to build, and it can be lost in a millisecond. And so, you know, it's one of the reasons that as leaders, we really, really have to watch our words. We live in a word business as leaders. So we just need to keep that in mind. I hope that answered it or put some clarity to it.
Let's give Chad an opportunity to unmute himself and ask a follow-up. So Chad, I can't find you, but I know you're out there. And again, it's a courageous and insightful question. A follow-up if you'd like. Jared, really insightful. And listen, this applies to every single one of us. We've all struggled on each side of it. The past is the past. What can we do to do better with this in the future? And I promise you I'll try and do it too. It feels good. Not easy, but it's certainly the right thing, and it's something we can control. I'll read one more question from Edgardo, then give folks a chance to type in one more question, then we'll move on to Tommy. Edgardo asks, and great question, how can as leaders we help develop horizontal trust with each other or with folks at a different level of the organization. In other words, members trusting other members. Does Edgardo, does JR's answer to the last and Rand's answer to the last question suffice, or do you want them to go in? I don't know where you are either, but saw you. Do you want them to go deeper here, Edgardo? There he is.
Hi. I'm just coming from always when I hear JR, I'm just coming from a high. I think thinking about this scenario of applying all of this, I'm just thinking about going back to normal and going back to the sites and going back to the office whenever. Our model is to basically have our members working each site. We do provide oversight and supervision, but mostly they're working by themselves. So now more than ever, we need to institute the discipline on them that these safety protocols and measures need to be followed. And like you said, we're not gonna be standing behind you with a checklist of if you're doing things, we expect you to do this. So a lot of this, I think, and this is to me a great concept, the horizontal trust, because we always talk about chain of command, go to your direct supervisor, but I don't think we don't talk enough about trusting each other as people on the same page, especially when we talk about members. You don't supervise each other, but you need to trust each other, and you need to make sure that everyone on your work site it's doing the correct thing, and that you guys are supporting each other, and you're taking accountability. So I guess my question is from the top of the hierarchy of ED of the operation, how can I do the best to encourage my members to trust each other and take accountability for each other as well?
So you get an excellent time here to reset, right? So as you bring them back in, right, as we bring our teams back together, as we begin now to bring this thing back into reality of the new reality, then we need to have strong talks with people about expectations. And as part of those expectations, we now need to, as first line leaders and executive directors, we need to now talk to them about this idea that I need you to trust each other, because this is an individual responsibility. And if you fail, you're going to bring a sickness to somebody over here's grandmother. And that's a very, very powerful example. The idea that, you failed to do the right thing and it caused a collapse. So you can use it in the negative. In the positive, the way that I would say is that, most of the folks that work on our sites, they trust each other anyway. They have to. If you're holding a nail gun for somebody, or you're holding a board, or you're doing any type of construction work, you generally got to trust the person that you're around. So what we need to do is build that trust. And again, when we get the reset, you now have the opportunity to re-talk about all of these things. And I think that's a good leader engagement for people. The other point that I would say is that, the basis of all leadership is leadership by example. Period. End of report. And that requires us to go to the sites. And that requires us to walk and share the hardship. And that requires us to be out in the hot sun and do all of the things that our people are doing, right? And be seen and engage people. And that's so I don't know if that helped or not. That was a great comment there, Eduardo. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you build early a culture of looking out for each other. I think the key is you sell it as, look, I want you to take care of yourself, and I want you to take care of the man or woman on your right or left. I mean, if you look historically at units that go to combat and stuff, you're not fighting for a nation, you're fighting for the person on your left or right. So that's just kind of the culture you need to, as you come back, you've got this time to start building that culture, having those talks, and making sure that they're looking out for each other, both in equipment and also, if somebody starts to look ill, just like dehydration, we keep an eye, if somebody stops sweating, you'd be concerned for them. So you just build that culture of looking out for each other.
Whispering to each other, I apologize. What I was asking Liz is how we're going to roll this out to all the AmeriCorps members to really help with this so that y'all can reinforce it. And Liz has a thought, so it may result in this group hearing the same message tomorrow, and then reinforcing it. If people have, the feedback about where have we been stashing JR and Ran, and boy, are they helpful. For many of you, this is, you're great managers, you're great leaders. This is leading under a sort of new vector of threat, which is public health issues. I have full confidence in you, but it is a new vector of threat. I encourage you, all the people on this call, you're all leaders, either leader by authority or leader by influence, and you're all managing as well, to really demand of the entity and ask of the entity for support that you need. Again, I'm not going to tell you physically where they are, it's a state secret, but there's certainly access to these guys as well as Thomas and Liz and others. And so let's get this right. Let's support you. Let's roll it out the right way. We started when we went into our COVID operating mode, we talked about the most important thing is safety, then applying the power of necessity and reprioritizing. Those priorities have not changed. Those lenses have not changed. What we're doing is changing. I have confidence we can do it well. But that's really going to happen to the extent that you feel entitled to having access to these guys and other leaders on the team. So please, please, please follow up, and Liz will make sure that they're available tomorrow and moving forward.
Thank you both. We really appreciate the time and energy and investment, and sorry in advance, but you're going to be asked to do more of these. So we really appreciate it. Lots of great, meaningful content here. And thanks to everybody who chimed in. There's just so much good dialogue going on the Zoom chat. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to review that. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, but at the same time, I also think it's important for us to hear a little bit from Tommy. So Tommy, I'm sorry we batted out of order here, but I'm actually really excited that you're going to kind of wrap us up, and maybe you can share a couple of highlights from this week, and if how they relate to some of the content that you heard from JR and Rand, feel free to incorporate that.
Sure. I'll keep this reasonably brief. As prior to this week, we had staff members who were out on site, and we built wall panels, and we used that opportunity to make a lot of observations and craft that COVID on-site safety policy. And this is kind of an update of what we did this week. We were joined this week, the staff members who worked last week were joined this week by 5 AmeriCorps members, and that they were kind of reintegrated in the workforce, and that was great. Kind of just to refresh everybody, the policy was really specific with regard to safety guidelines and procedures. We did mandatory 6-foot distancing, mandatory masks. We had exclusive use of the site, meaning that subcontractors were supposed to work elsewhere while we and the AmeriCorps workers were working in a specific site. And we cleaned and sanitized the company vehicles. These were kind of some of the precautions we took. Based on our first week, at the tail end of that week, something that Dulcie actually did was she reached out to the GC with whom we're partnering to share our safety policy and to kind of align everybody. And in hindsight, that was a really important thing to have done. What we saw between the tail end of last week and the beginning of this week with regard to compliance on the that subcontractor base was kind of remarkable. I mean, there was a tremendous uptick in the use of masks. It was actually very, very reassuring, and clearly that message resonated with our partner, and he disseminated that message out to the subs, and it was really great. That was it was so effective it almost took me by surprise. We still ran into a little stumbling block the first day when we got out there. There were subs in our space, but we told them they had to leave to be in compliance. with what our guidelines were, and they did. They listened to us, and they picked up all their stuff, and they went and worked elsewhere. So once we were on the site, this is SBP staff and the AmeriCorps members. We really did adhere, without exception, to the guidelines that we'd set for ourselves. We always kept 6 foot distance. We wore masks. And one thing I'll say as an observation is, when you're in a space and you're doing that and you don't deviate from that as a practice, it becomes second nature. Yeah, I know 6 feet like I've never known 6 feet in my life. I know how far that is away from somebody, and that's you kind of look at people's eyes and you know when they're smiling, because you can't see their smiles anymore, and that's great. I think that, speaking towards the AmeriCorps members who came out, and I may be putting words in their mouth, but I think they felt very safe by the environment that we created. I think because they saw, maybe this relates to the leadership presentation we just received, but when they saw staff members wearing PPE without deviation, they felt comfortable that their safety was being kept in mind at all times. And I think that we all started to feel really good about what we were doing. I actually, to be frank, I felt safer on our work site than I feel going to the grocery at this point. I think we created a very safe environment. The prior week we were building panels. This week we were doing interior painting, and the first day we had 2 homes in which we were working. We had 10 people come out. We divided between the two homes and had 5 people apiece priming. Because we had some kind of a variation of the number of people that could show up, not everybody could make it every single day. So we did have to pivot a little bit. On the second day, we went into one. We kind of just went into one unit, and we gave that back to the subs. It was a conversation that we had. We gave it back to them. We shared timelines, and the other house in which the subs worked, they were able to get ahead, so that as a strategy, we were able to get the most that we could done in the one house that we went to, and then we're going to be able to go back and finish that second house tomorrow. And it didn't put anybody behind. It was just sort of a strategy that we worked together with our partner to achieve. I did want to make a couple notes about adaptations we made in the field. Hannah Roberts actually came up with the idea of setting an alarm on her phone, and every hour on the hour when it went off, we would all kind of congregate in the largest room in the home, but still 6 feet apart, and we would all sanitize our hands, and this became kind of habitual, and it didn't interfere with our productivity at all. It was just a moment where we reestablished what we were doing as a pattern. And other than that, when we arrived every morning, we took our temperatures. We wrapped tool handles in blue tape and initialed them so that we minimized tool sharing, and I think that was really effective too. Other than that, there are a couple of things that I felt that we learned. I think from the very get-go, and especially with the AmeriCorps members, and again, this probably relates back to the leadership presentation, but we established ground rules, expectations, and patterns from the very beginning. And along with the GC getting the word out to the subcontractors, I think that things started off very well. I do think that some people will need the constant reminder of that they need to stay aligned with what we expect from them. And that's just going to be the landscape in which we work. But people respected our workspace, and they didn't interfere with it, which was one of the rules that we had. And I think it was a really successful week. I think that we have a good idea of how to reintegrate, and I think that went well. And on a more practical note, I think the only minor thing that we noticed, but it's probably important to mention, is that you need to monitor your PPE and your sanitary wipes and disinfectants, because I would tend to think that they're harder to come by for some people, and we did have a little bit disappear, not anything major, but it's something to keep in mind when you're out there, that you need to keep track of that stuff. So other than that, it was a really successful week, I believe, and next week we'll be at it again, and can report more on what we observed.
Hey, Tommy, thank you. There's some great comments on different techniques that you used on site, just feedback from the team. So thanks everybody for chiming in here. And thank you for leading the charge from New Orleans. And I think doing the right thing, by you role modeling what the expectations are for others by doing it yourselves. You set the standard there at the site. So thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. Just as a heads up, for anyone who is returning to work, Thomas and Kyle have been working on return to work guidelines that you will be receiving soon. We want to make sure that everybody, all of the leaders out there who are running sites, who are running job sites, that you have access to the information that you need and that your team needs to execute as well as Tommy and colleagues did in New Orleans. So that is coming your way soon. Last thing I want to share is, for those of you who don't have JR or Rand's emails, I'll go ahead and send those out afterwards in case you have any follow-up questions. I imagine some of you might want to set phone calls with them. They're a great resource. It is crystal clear that we need them on more of these calls. So thank you in advance, Rand and JR, and more to come, everybody else from these two. So thank you all. Sorry that we went over on time, but hopefully this was very relevant, really helpful content today. And we wish you all the best. Be safe. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, great work, folks. Thank you.